Good morning. This is an open meeting of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission on February 10, 2016, under the Government in the Sunshine Act. The Commission today will consider a staff recommendation to adopt final rules to implement the last set of requirements regarding the trades that securities-based swap dealers need to include in computing their dealer de minimis thresholds under Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act, which determines whether a security-based swap dealer will be subject to the registration and other requirements of Title VII. Specifically, today's recommendation addresses how we will determine whether or not a non-U.S. dealer must register with the Commission when that dealer uses personnel located in the United States to arrange, negotiate, or execute a security-based swap with a non-U.S. counterparty. This important issue is one we have considered in prior releases, including in a reproposal last year, and it is one that the CFTC continues to consider. The final rules before us today are integral to the SEC's regulation of the security-based swap market, representing a key milestone in the completion of our regime for overseeing dealers. These rules will help ensure that security-based swap dealing activity carried out in the United States is treated similarly for purposes of the registration requirements for dealers, whether carried out by a U.S. person or by a non-U.S. person. Completing the entire Title VII regulatory regime for security-based swap dealers is a high priority for the Commission. After finalizing the ground rules for U.S. activity with today's anticipated action, the Commission will be able to proceed to adopt the remaining requirements for dealers, in particular, rules for how they conduct business with counterparties and how they use capital margin and asset segregation to maintain their financial strength and protect counterparties. Throughout this process, we continue to consult with our colleagues at the CFTC to develop a coordinated, efficient regulatory framework that meets the important objectives of Title VII of the Dodd-Frank Act. Foremost among those objectives are reducing risk, enhancing transparency, and promoting market integrity within the financial system. Today's rules will further these goals by helping ensure that all transactions of dealers that involve market-facing activity by personnel located in the United States are treated equally. In today's global security-based swap market, much of the transaction volume occurs in the United States, especially for security-based swap transactions involving U.S.-based reference entities. The rules being considered today would subject this significant activity to Title VII's dealer requirements, thereby promoting the goals of over-the-counter derivatives reform and avoiding a world in which market participants are able to exit our regulatory framework without also exiting the U.S. security-based swap market. By doing so, the rules should also mitigate the likelihood and extent of market fragmentation, which could limit U.S. market participants to a liquidity pool that is only a fraction of the current size of the current market, with potentially worse pricing and less efficiency. So I want to commend the staff on their thoughtful analysis and hard work on these final rules, which are another important step forward in completing our Title VII mandates. Before I ask Steve Luparella, Director of the Division of Trading and Markets, to discuss the staff recommendation, I would specifically like to thank Steve and his Deputy Director, Gary Barnett, for their leadership on this rulemaking, as well as Steve's counsels, Malou Huth and Carl Embigholz. I would also like to especially commend the rulemaking team for their hard and exceptional work. Brian Bussey, Carol McGee, Richard Gabbert, and Margaret Rubin from the Office of Derivatives Policy, and Mark Flannery, of course, Jennifer Marietta Westberg, Vanessa Countryman, Narahari Patak, and Charles Lynn from the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis. Many thanks as well to Annie Small, Lori Price, Brooke Shirey, Bob Bagnall, and Michaela de la Dernier from the Office of the General Counsel. They have provided invaluable assistance in developing and fine-tuning this release. In addition, I would like to thank many other staff throughout the agency for their contributions, including Paul Dudek, Amy Starr, Andrew Schaffler from the Division of Corporation Finance, Reed Moyo, Charlotte Buford, and Carrie Knowles from the Division of Enforcement, Sarah Krovich, Michael Daduke, and Rachel Loco from the Division of Investment Management, Michael Hershaft and Kerry O'Brien from the Office of Compliance Inspections and Examinations, OC, Catherine Martin and Laura Compton from the Office of International Affairs. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to Commissioner Stein and Commissioner Pivovar and all of our council for their work and comments on these and related rules over these past months. Now I will turn the meeting over to Steve Luparella and his team to give us more information on the division's recommendation.
Thank you, Chair White, and good morning, Commissioners. Today we are recommending for the Commission's consideration a release to address application of the Title VII security-based swap dealer de minimis counting requirement to transactions between two non-U.S. persons that involve activity in the United States. The Commission sought comment on the issue last April in light of significant comments generated by the Commission's cross-border proposing release and the CFTC's November 2013 staff advisory. Commission staff have considered carefully the issues raised by the commenters. The approach the staff is recommending for adoption today is largely unchanged from the 2015 proposal, which staff developed after considerable consultation with our counterparts at the CFTC. Consistent with the proposal, the focus of our recommendation is on the market-facing activity of non-U.S. dealers. We continue to believe that this is an appropriate focus for the dealer counting requirement. Currently available data suggests that dealers are counterparties in upwards of 99% of security-based swap transactions. Focusing on market-facing activity in the U.S. should help ensure that our dealer rules apply to the vast majority of security-based swap dealing activity in the U.S. By ensuring that these non-U.S. dealers have to count these transactions, U.S. and non-U.S. dealers will be subject to the same dealer requirements when acting in the U.S. security-based swap market. This approach should advance the objectives of our dealer regime while reducing competitive distortions that could exacerbate fragmentation and increase risk. With that brief introduction, I would like to thank each office that worked on this recommendation. And if you were at MSAC, this is my chance to make it right. The Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, the Office of the General Counsel.
That was embarrassing, Steve.
Well, thank you for reminding me. and other participating Commission offices. I believe that these efforts have brought us to a balanced result that achieves the goals of Title VII while keeping an eye towards practicable workability for market participants. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Steve. Before we proceed into the substance of the rule, I'd like to reiterate Steve's expression of thanks to our colleagues in other offices, in particular in developing 5 recommendations over the past 4 years addressing registration requirements and cross-border issues. We have worked closely with our colleagues and largely the same group of colleagues in the Division of Economic Risk Analysis and Office of General Counsel. Over that period, we've worked together to address some of the most challenging legal issues under Title VII and to grapple with understanding and explaining the complex economic effects of our rules. Through that process, we have developed a strong working relationship characterized by a frank and open exchange of ideas in an atmosphere of mutual respect. I think it is clear in this release that the economic data and considerations have substantially informed our analysis. This release, as with all of our releases, has truly been a team effort. I also have the good fortune of working directly with a great team in derivatives policy, including Carol McGee, who leads the office, and Richard Gabbert and Margaret Rubin, the same team that brought you the proposal. I will give the floor to Margaret Rubin to very briefly describe each of the key provisions of the recommendation.
Thanks, Brian. As Steve mentioned, the final rule is largely unchanged from the proposal and would require that a non-U.S. person include in its calculation towards security-based swap dealer registration any transaction connected with its dealing activity that it arranges, negotiates, or executes using personnel located in the United States. As in the proposal, the release explains that the phrase arrange, negotiate, or execute encompasses market-facing activity in connection with a security-based swap transaction. Our interpretation of these types of activities is the same as in the proposal, but in response to commenter concerns, we've attempted to provide additional clarifications around certain types of trades, such as algorithmic trading and electronic execution. In addition, as in the proposal, the rule turns on the activity of personnel located in a U.S. branch or office, which means that the dealer needs to consider personnel that are assigned to the U.S. operations of the dealer or its agent. Each of these elements of the final rule should make it easier for market participants to identify whether a particular transaction has triggered our activity-based test. At the same time, as the Chair and Steve both mentioned, it should still ensure that dealing activity that raises regulatory concerns is subject to Title VII. With that, I'll give the microphone to Jennifer Marietta Westberg to speak briefly about the economic analysis and the recommendation.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair White and Commissioners. Last year, the Commission proposed rules that would govern the application of certain Title VII requirements to non-U.S. persons that engage in security-based swap dealing activity in the United States by using their own personnel or personnel of their agents located in U.S. branches or offices to arrange, negotiate, or execute the transactions. Today, the Commission is considering whether to adopt rules that focus on the application of transactions towards a non-U.S. person's de minimis threshold calculations. Taken together with rules the Commission adopted in 2014, today's rules help determine whether a non-U.S. person must register with the Commission as a security-based swap dealer. As a result, these rules define the scope of entities that will eventually become subject to entity-level requirements under Title VII, such as business conduct standards and capital and margin requirements. The Division of Economic and Risk Analysis has analyzed the likely economic effects of today's rules against a baseline that includes the Title VII rules the Commission has adopted to date. Our analysis of the economic effects of these rules focuses on competition and efficiency in a security-based swap market that is characterized by a high degree of cross-border activity concentrated in a small group of dealers. DERA has examined the effect these rules may have on competition between U.S. and non-U.S. dealers, as well as the availability of security-based swap liquidity for U.S. persons. We believe that the rules we are adopting today provide a more level playing field for U.S. and non-U.S. dealers that use U.S.-based personnel to engage in security-based swap transactions. Further, we believe these rules will make more costly the types of restructuring that could lead to market fragmentation. Specifically, non-U.S. persons who choose to relocate dealing activity as a result of the final rules would incur the costs of relocating personnel who arrange, negotiate, or execute security-based swap transactions, and also would forego the benefits of access to local expertise in security-based swaps based on U.S. reference entities. Thus, these rules may reduce the likelihood that liquidity in the security-based swap market splits into one pool that U.S. persons can readily access and another that is more difficult for U.S. persons to access. As a result, the rules may limit market fragmentation while applying the Title VII dealer framework to non-U.S. persons that are likely to raise the types of concerns that framework seeks to address. In addition, the final rules promote the risk mitigation goals of Title VII. The rules require to be included in the dealer de minimis calculations those transactions that, while less likely to directly expose U.S. persons to counterparty risk, may allow financial risk to spill over into U.S. markets. Reputational risk and liquidity spillovers represent two channels by which risks in foreign security-based swap markets may manifest in U.S. financial markets without the involvement of U.S. persons as counterparties. We believe the final rules should attenuate risk from both channels. Our economic analysis of these rules also includes consideration of the costs that non-U.S. market participants are likely to bear due to the requirement to count transactions involving U.S. personnel towards the de minimis threshold. Not only does our analysis contemplate the cost of assessing each individual transaction for the involvement of U.S. personnel, it also considers alternative means of compliance, such as restricting communication between U.S. personnel and personnel that arrange, negotiate, or execute security-based swap transactions. We acknowledge that these rules will impose costs on non-U.S. market participants, but believe that they represent a reasonable approach that mitigates the burden to market participants while yielding the benefits I just summarized. I wish to thank the Office of the General Counsel and the Division of Trading and Markets for being excellent partners in this rulemaking. In particular, I want to express my appreciation for the staff of the Office of Derivatives Policy for collaborating closely with us throughout this rulemaking and helping DERA staff refine their analysis of these rules. Thank you, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer, Margaret, Brian, Steve. I don't have any questions. I'll turn to Commissioner Stein for her comments and any questions.
I also wanted to thank the staff for all of their hard work on bringing this recommendation to the Commission, including Brian Bussey, Carol McGee, Richard Gabbert, Margaret Rubin, Hari Patak, Charles Lynn, Lori Price, Robert Bagnall, and Michaela de la Jenner. Today, the Commission considers an important rule that clarifies who should register as a security-based swap dealer under United States law. This rule appropriately acknowledges the global nature of swaps and their attendant risk. It is designed to ensure that foreign dealers operating in the United States who pose a risk to United States markets cannot evade registering in the United States. This rule does this by appropriately focusing on the location of the agents or the personnel engaged in the firm's security-based swaps dealing activity. Swaps are financial contracts that can provide buyers and sellers with the ability to better control certain cash flows. While these financial instruments may be helpful to market participants in managing their risks, they can also transfer risk in unpredictable ways. During the financial crisis, we witnessed such risk transfer with nearly devastating effect. Over the course of a few days in 2008, AIG, who had sold credit default swaps, or CDS, covering billions and billions of dollars in assets, and was a major participant in the global trade of derivatives, helped to further a growing loss of confidence in the United States and global financial markets. Credit default swaps function much like insurance for bonds. AIG was promising that the bonds would pay or it would make up the difference. As AIG's own creditworthiness came into question, a drumbeat of collateral calls questioned AIG's ability to make good on its promises. The shortfall was growing by billions of dollars each day, and AIG simply couldn't pay. As AIG neared nearly catastrophic failure, the New York Federal Reserve Bank stepped in with an $85 billion emergency loan. Within months, AIG borrowed nearly $128 billion from the government. The concentration, as was mentioned by Jennifer, of swap dealing activity amongst a few financial firms, as well as the opacity of the CDS market, contributed to the threat of a daisy chain of failures. This resulted in the government having to bail out companies no one had ever dreamed would be risky. Moreover, the global nature of swaps allowed the crisis to spread quickly around the world. As a result, the bailouts and other effects of the crisis spilled across international borders. Today, the market for security-based swaps remains truly global. About half of the trading activity in North American corporate single-name CDS occurs between United States counterparties and those based abroad, while approximately 40% occurs between non-U.S. counterparties. Many of these non-U.S. counterparties are actually foreign affiliates of a United States financial group. Foreign affiliates of a United States financial group may expose the United States financial group to reputational risk. Such risk is inherent in the relationship between a United States financial group and its foreign affiliate. A United States parent financial group is subject to the consequences of the dealing activity of its foreign affiliate, regardless of any explicit guarantees. We've learned that repeatedly. A United States financial group can face its exposure by absorbing the foreign affiliate's liabilities. However, it can also face this exposure if market participants question the group's creditworthiness in the event that it decides not to support its foreign affiliate. Today's final rule considers this potential spillover risk or contagion. Accordingly, when security-based swap transactions occur between two non-United States persons, but they are arranged, negotiated, or executed by personnel or agents located in a United States branch or office of a dealer, those transactions under the rule cannot be excluded from the volume test used to trigger dealer registration requirements. Conversely, transactions that do not involve personnel or agents located in a United States branch or office of a dealer are excluded from the volume test. As a result, today's rule will help ensure that any dealer that exceeds the $8 billion notional threshold, including any of its dealing activity in the United States, would need to register with the Commission during the initial phase-in period. As I've said before, the determination of what security-based swap transactions count for purposes of the registration requirement is very important. Registration triggers important obligations and responsibilities for the good of the overall marketplace, for the good of the entities that may transmit those risks, as well as enhancing resilience in times of stress. This rule appropriately considers the risks to the United States financial markets. While I'm pleased to support today's rule, there are a number of important Title VII rules that still need to be finalized prior to turning on the new dealer registration regime, including the application of business conduct standards, the application of capital margin, as well as other dealer requirements. Other key elements of the Title VII framework also remain outstanding, including reporting and dissemination of transactions, and the application of clearing and trade execution requirements. I look forward to the staff's recommendation on these outstanding items in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Pivovar.
Thank you, Chair White. I'm pleased to support today's rulemaking, and I want to join my fellow commissioners in commending the staff for their excellent work. This release represents the third time the Commission has addressed the question of how the security-based swap dealer definition in Title VII of Dodd-Frank applies to the U.S. activities of non-U.S. dealers. In this case, I think we can truly say that the third time is the charm. The fact that we undertook two successive proposals with related rounds of public comment before adopting this rulemaking demonstrates both the complexity of the security-based swap market and our commitment to getting this rule right rather than just getting it done. Although not all market participants will agree with every decision we have made, the final rule itself is well thought and well supported by the analysis in the release. Despite the relatively narrow subject matter of today's rulemaking, it is a vital part of the overall Title VII framework. Specifically, it provides market participants with clear guidance regarding which security-based swap transactions to count when determining whether they must register as a security-based swap dealer. As such, it is an extremely important piece of the elaborate puzzle that is the Title VII regulatory regime, and will help global derivatives dealers decide how best to structure their businesses in order to comply with our rules. This release is also a great example of consensus-based rulemaking. There are a number of Title VII rules outstanding that I believe could also gain unanimous support. I look forward to working with both of my fellow commissioners to build on the momentum that this rulemaking gives us in the Title VII space, and hope to be part of many more unanimous votes on similarly non-controversial rules in the future. Once again, I'd like to thank the staff across the agency for their efforts on today's rulemakings. I have no questions.
Thank you very much. Unless there are any further questions or comments, we'll take the vote. Do the commissioners vote to approve the recommendation from the Division of Trading and Markets on these Title VII requirements? Please signify your vote by saying yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The recommendation is approved unanimously. Thank you all. That concludes our agenda. We are adjourned.